Well now, this certainly comes off as lucky. I originally was a little stumped for what to make this week's video on. My usual go-to series to fill the gap of no news would be the terrible or coming back kind of series, but since, if things have gone well, both have just recently released, I can't exactly just run it back so soon. And looking forwards in time, there's all sorts of productions finally getting their releases after months of delays, so there's plenty to talk about there. And really, I just wanted to try something completely out of left field. This week I felt like just having a good old time watching some sort of oldie film for irony's sake. I'm craving some real bad CG we can all just point at and laugh, you know? And since we haven't touched a video game for a month, why not talk about that 1995 classic Mortal Kombat movie? That's the perfect kind of spectacle I just want to dissect right now. And then I did more research only to discover that, hold on, there's a new Mortal Kombat movie being made, and it's set to release on January 15th, 2021. That's incredibly soon. Why didn't I have notes on this? So this week we're going to be tackling two birds with one stone as we go over all the news of this upcoming modern Mortal Kombat movie, whilst enjoying the ironically amazing time that can be had with one of the earliest video game adaptations ever. Sound good? Alrighty then. So while yes, these two films are both of the same name and franchise, they're not to be directly connected, as this new 2021 version is a reboot spin-off from the original film series. Which makes sense really. The original classic was a major hit that's still beloved today, whilst the sequel bombed, severely halting most momentum for the franchise. The third film was then plagued in development hell for decades, until it was eventually melted down by new company deals and warped into this whole new movie, after some online momentum also somewhat inspired it to come back. It's a whole thing. Now, I somewhat know the world of Mortal Kombat, but I'm no expert. I mean, I've never actually owned any of the games, but I was that kid who would watch every fatality and babality and X-ray compilation I could find every time a new game came out, you know? And I mean, let's be honest, that's the real kind of backbone of the series, isn't it? Still, beyond that, there's an interesting and diverse cast of characters from all sorts of realms, backgrounds, and species. Now, some of these characters are iconic ones that cannot be missed for being the mainest characters of the bunch. These include the likes of, obviously, Scorpion and Sub-Zero, the mascots of the series, as well as protagonist trio Sonja Blade, Johnny Cage, and Liu Kang, godly ally Raiden, and Shang Tsung, host of the original Mortal Kombat tournament. But of course, both films have taken slightly different approaches to their cast lists in several ways. So the first film opens up with Shang Tsung, our protagonist of the story, killing the younger brother of Liu Kang, the mainest character there is. Except, in the games, there isn't a major younger brother character. This Chan Kang guy is pretty much invented for the film, as a motivation of revenge behind Liu Kang. In the actual Mortal Kombat canon, there is a younger brother, but he's named Chao, and his status is just unknown. Regardless, this film then continues with brief introductions of our other two main characters. First with Sonja Blade hunting down her nemesis Kano by intruding a nightclub with guns and actively beating up people in the way, and Johnny Cage finding his way through a group of agents only to reveal that they were actors after all, and amateur ones at that. And actually, as simple as these small intro scenes are, somehow it felt really satisfying to watch just knowing who these characters are more from the actual games. It's not over the top, it's done pretty basically, and yet it just kinda works. Can I be nostalgic for a movie that existed when I was -1 years old? Anyway, with these three characters essentially being the heroes of the story, naturally, when it comes to the 2021 reboot, they're all set to return. Though actually, the new movie hasn't exactly revealed who's cast as Johnny Cage just yet, but there are a few suspicious gaps in the listing. Anyway, moving on, the general point is Sonja Blade will follow Kano's track onto the tournament grounds if she has to, and Johnny Cage wants to prove to the world that he's not a fake as the media seems to label him. These are both pretty in line with the games. Here's where things start diverging on the cast side of things though. We next see Liu Kang at the Temple of Light, where he settles to join the Mortal Kombat tournament as it's explained to him. And then Raiden shows up, the eternal god of thunder, and he's played by Christopher Lambert. Now, sure, we don't technically get to see Raiden's face early on, but this dude's white, and in general, back in the 90s, a lot of executives were conflicted on casting more diverse actors, and specifically Asian actors, with such a big budget. Of course, now, in the modern day, Mortal Kombat 2021 prides itself with a much more culturally representative cast, which is just great to hear all round. So the main three all end up in the same place, readying to board the boat that'll take them to this tournament, and seeing how everyone interacts is genuinely really fun and funny sometimes.
Thank God I didn't ask him to park the car.
Also, there's a couple extra characters briefly introduced here who are soon forgotten in this film. Sonja Blade has her partner in crime Jax, who is a full character in the games, but he gets left behind in the film as she enters the boat. All the while he spouts some very unemotive ADR towards her.
Sonja, don't get on that thing. Hey, Sonja!
Wait, don't go. Sonja. Johnny Cage also makes a new friend with Artlene. Artlene? This guy is a film-exclusive character, and surprise, surprise, he's gonna lose a match later on. Now, this film was created when there were only about 2 games out, so obviously, character-wise, they were kinda limited, but with the 2021 reboot, suddenly there's a whole lot more source material to play with all sorts of character introductions, multiple arcs for each of them, and all sorts of timeline warping too. How far this new movie will actually go? We have no idea just yet. But in the next scene in the classic movie, the trio next meet Shang Tsung in person on the boat, who then shows off his 2 servants, Scorpion and Sub-Zero. They kind of briefly touch on how they hate each other, yet are both under Shang's command, but the movie doesn't properly explain how that all works. Even still, our new movie rendition has an interesting little detail about the cast of these 2 characters. On the IMDb cast list, their actors are set to also play as Hanzo Hasashi and Bihan. Now these are their human names, and were characters not introduced until a little later in the games. Essentially, it introduces a whole new arc leaning more into their families and personal lives, with Hanzo, his clan, and his family being wiped out and believing Bihan was the killer. Upon being resurrected as Scorpion, he then vows to get revenge on the now Sub-Zero at the first tournament and succeeds, with Bihan's younger, more moral brother taking up the Sub-Zero title. And really, that can make for a much more compelling story on the side over these 2 just being fairly flat but cool looking rivals to the main trio. There's more character options in the future, but we'll talk about them as they get more relevant. Also, yeah, that CG work on Raiden's teleporting is just fantastic. So somehow the trio aren't that shocked by all the fantastical movements, and exposition is all explained to them. There are multiple realms, Earthrealm may be invaded, Shang has won 9 out of 10 Mortal Kombat so far, and the fate of billions rests on those 3. Also, apparently the essence of Mortal Kombat is about life, not death. Though I gotta admit, I think I disagree about all that, all things considered, you know? Though I'm pretty sure I'm not even allowed to show it on screen. And hey, if you're liking my stuff so far, do consider subscribing. Only you can help balance out my unbalanced sub ratio, and maybe you'll learn films exist before they're even given trailers, like this one. I mean, it threw me off. So it's day 0 of Mortal Kombat. Everyone's on the island handling it differently, and Shang gives them all a feast before the main event. We're shown a preview of Sub-Zero's skills as he freezes and shatters a grunt, which, though kind of anticlimactic on the choreography, is pretty cool on the effects front, albeit a little tame. And the trio try to sneak up on Shang's quarters. Why? Well, Sonja's all about the Kano mission, Liu Kang wants to avenge his brother, and Johnny is just tagging along.
We can't help it, it's a guy thing.
Right. It's here we get a whole bunch more exposition. Kano is gruffly talking about his dirty fights of the past, and revealed early is the 4-arm champion, Goro, who looks dated, but also kind of works on being intimidating still. Or is that just me? Anyway, we briefly see the 2 interact until Shang shows up telling his worries about Liu Kang meeting Katana, and how he plans to humiliate Sonja, not harm her for some reason, and yeah. Really, this part comes off like a kid's script where the villain tells you exactly what it is you need to be doing. And you'd think with Sonja bringing a pistol, she could just, peek her head over the railing and bap bap and be done with it, right? Like, at least in the games it makes sense that the gun's useless considering health bars, but here, it seems hard to justify. Anyway, at this point, the trio get out of there, they're heard by Shang and are ambushed by a collection of grunts. But not before Liu Kang randomly gets lost in a blue forest away from the others and has to fight Reptile. Oh my god, what is that? No wonder they decided to make him look invisible for most of the fight. That is dreadful. Oh, and now the others show up. How orchestrated. Anyway, beyond that disaster, this following grunt fight scene is just beautifully cheesy and finally gives me a chance to talk about that amazing theme song. I mean, this thing is just iconic, and apparently it got platinum in just 2 weeks. It's just some dumb fun right the way through, and pretty impressively, the actual choreography of these fight scenes is actually seriously thought out. Like, these characters are all versed in martial arts, which would make sense, but it's a surprisingly nice surprise. Alright, next day, the tournament can officially begin, and it starts off with Liu Kang versus some unnamed guy. I wonder who's gonna win. Again, the choreography is really good, with them splicing it up a a tad with staffs that get used in all sorts of scenarios. And upon the Grunt's defeat, Shang Tsung proceeds to absorb their souls, as that's a thing they can do.
Fatality.
Well, I'm loving the reference, but I'm not sure I'd quite call it that. Following on more interestingly is Sonja versus Kano right up early. And really, I guess that's all they can do. There's not a lot of named characters involved here, so more grunts would just be boring and predictable. So we get some back and forth exposition and heightened stakes with Kano's knife, and eventually Sonja wins. Her arc is over, I guess. And hey, look at that, she actually breaks his neck. Brutal. If this wasn't Mortal Kombat. Finally, we get Johnny Cage's match against Scorpion of all people, set up somewhere entirely different from Shang, apparently. Now this fight's actually pretty awesome. We see more of Scorpion's snake whip, which I somehow never actually realized came out of his palm, and after Johnny outsmarts it, he is teleported to hell to fight on. And hey, we get more game-based connections with the battlefield actually feeling like an in-game stage, with it being a narrow 2D plane. And Johnny actually uses more environmental factors to win. Overall, this scene is just a fantastic love letter of a fight that really feels Mortal Kombat-y. And that final fatality shot reference is just mwah. The only downside is it somewhat makes the strength of Scorpion seem belittled since he's never won a fight in the film, but what can you do? Now how does Johnny get out of hell? Following that amazing show, we then have some leaps in logic. Up next is Liu Kang versus Katana, and in the match, they don't really fight as she just whispers advice into his ear instead. And then Shang Tsung calls them out on it, stating that he's disappointed. Is this like some big betrayal on her side because she's supposed to be enslaved by him? Are there no more matches today, but Liu just had two planned? Who knows, but apparently it's nighttime now. Also, looking ahead at the 2021 movie for a bit, Katana isn't actually cast anywhere, but someone who is cast is Mylena, being a mutant hybrid clone of Katana, with her goal set on killing and replacing her. So surely Katana would also be appearing in some form. And Katana's arc around everything will probably be a whole lot more fleshed out, unless Mylena's already taken care of her in the movie or something. It's something to know. Also, there's a couple new characters popping up just in the reboot. One is Kung Lao, another iconic design whose upbringing is much like Liu Kang's, though he hosts more pacifist ideals, rejecting the tournament nomination, but has an inferiority complex to Liu Kang and will severely punish those when necessary. Presumably, he'll be some kind of ally who grates against Liu Kang. And yeah, he's the one with the razor blade hat. Our other newbie, thought to be more of a minor role, is Nitara. Introduced in 2002, she is a vampire who needs life energy like Shang Tsung, but can get it through blood, not souls. She's morally neutral and self-serving, mostly wanting to separate her realm from Outworld, so where she fits in the picture is anybody's guess, really. Okay, back to the film, and yes, it's nighttime, and actually, it's a whole nother match happening as well, with Liu Kang again, and now Sub-Zero, with Shang Tsung just, again, not really around. This battle is a whole lot more amateur than Scorpion's. Sure, the choreography's fine, but the actual story beats come off like a student film. Sub-Zero spends an incredibly long amount of time on this one ice move of his that turns into some kind of barrier attack, and then as Liu Kang is lost, Katana appears again to repeat her advice from beforehand of using the element of life to beat him. But what's with the cryptic messaging? And why is it being battered around the audience's head so much? And how does she know that there's going to be a bucket of water in the match? And there's so many other things that just come off as kind of poorly executed. But hey, I guess a giant ice pick stabbed through the chest is pretty intense. Kind of. Though technically it's not a death with the freezing element. Okay, now things can get going seriously. Maybe this is all just one big day. Still, it's Goro's time to shine. We get a brief basic montage of him wiping out grunts to insinuate a bigger tournament, even though it still doesn't really feel like it, and then he's up against our boy Arlene. You can see where this is going. Oh hey Johnny, thanks for joining us out of, hell, somehow. And though Goro doesn't look 100% here, I still managed to get a fair bit uncomfortable watching this play out. Cause with the immense strength of those four arms, yeah, you can imagine how things will end up playing out. So Arlene ends up dazed like characters do in the game, and with a final finish him from Shang Tsung, Goro lifts up Arlene and proceeds to bonk him on the head and step on his spine. And all of it is shot as PG-13 as it can. That's incredibly underwhelming. But hey, at least they don't have to be scared of the gore. As for Mortal Kombat 2021, it's a whole different story. This film is confirmed to be on trend as being a full-on R-rated film. Mortal Kombat is one of the goriest games of the 90s, and this new reboot movie could very well be set to be one of the goriest films of all time if it wants to be. Fatalities are confirmed to be making a proper appearance, along with my personal favorite X-ray moves as well. Oh yeah. In fact, in a couple of tweets, it's been confirmed that both the physical attributes of the fight scenes will be properly managed, with the actors all being martial artists, and that there's going to be some modern day CGI planted in for those particularly colourful moments. Which, as much as I'm sure I'll feel physically sick actually watching, is still incredible to hear for a representation of the Mortal Kombat series. So with the trio all discouraged, Raiden pops in to lecture them all about their fears and having to overcome them, describing Johnny as reckless, Sonja as a lone wolf, and Liu as destiny fleeing. And after some back and forth, Johnny eventually decides to challenge Goro himself to get over this hurdle, which Raiden secretly agrees with, even though that just sounds like more recklessness to me. Whatever. And so it's set up, Goro versus Johnny, and Johnny's winning technique is his iconic splits and nut punch. And as much as that's kind of the trailer cliche, here I really enjoyed it, especially with how it lines up with his character. After that, it becomes a matter of using the environment again to lead Goro to a cliff edge and promptly knock him off. Something that was just impossible for poor Art Lean. Though this fight sure felt like it ended anticlimactically at the same time. It was almost too easy this time around, you know? So the plot continues with Shang now kidnapping Sonja and taking her through a portal to Outworld, where Raiden can no longer follow. The two boys chase after her and Reptile sneaks in to attack them. Somehow, Liu catches him in the act, somehow knew he could be contained in these corpse decor, and then proceeds to fight him in this admittedly well-replicated setting, while Johnny, I don't know, twiddles his thumbs outside or something. The fight eventually ends with Liu Kang's special move, the bicycle kick, which is pretty simple enough, and they continue onwards. Katana rocks up telling that she is the rightful heir to the throne before her realm was invaded by Shang Tsung.
It was beautiful once.
And then after that, she tells them that in the Black Tower, there are 3 trials to overcome. You must face your enemy, face yourself, and face your worst fear. I thought this actually meant like there were literally 3 trial rooms to overcome before the final floor, but apparently not. We just skip right ahead to the final room with Sonja now chained up in a dress and with her hair everywhere, cause you gotta have a damsel in distress in the 90s. There, the gang has somehow snuck in and are ready to confront Shang Tsung, who's submitting himself into the tournament as well. And with Liu taking on Shang, the final fight begins, with the fantastically cheesy main theme coming back like the structure of some kind of anime. And it's within this fight that the actual trials come out. Face Your Enemy has a bunch of grunts pop up against Liu, Face Yourself deals with Shang's words trying to get at him, and Face Your Worst Fears has Shang morph into the form of his younger brother, only for Liu to accept reality and eventually, with a bit more of a beating, make Shang fall onto the spiked ground below after it was building up for like 5 solid minutes. Keeping it PG-13, of course. And with that, the souls are released from Shang's absorption, some nice words are said from the younger brother, that guy in the background is just T-posing along, and everyone can return to Earth victorious. Though you don't really feel like there's much of a threat if you were on Earth, you know? And so with a final congrats from an oblivious Raiden, the happy ending is reached. But not before the bigger evil Emperor rocks in with his new threat and the gang all poses up for a sequel. And it all ends up with a classic theme of listing the Mortal Kombat characters. Cheesy, goofy, and yet really fun despite the simplicity. Overall, this film just comes out as a great ironic watch. The CGI is surprisingly alright in some places, and other times dreadful. The actual story beats are really simplistic, which you could argue works fine enough, but at the same time, there's a lot of missing logic, like Johnny just disappearing and appearing anywhere, or the actual motivations behind why characters disagree or do what they do. That being said, there's a great layer of comedy spliced throughout the film that is genuinely quite good in some places, and is something I certainly would miss if the new reboot was to take things too seriously. But of course, being too casual leads to moments like this guy getting in the fight with a cushion, and a lot of really underwhelming acting. So it's a fair medium that needs to be met. Now if the new movie can bring back that classic theme song somehow in there and give us some classic logos on fire again, and maybe give us some new references like that good old toasty, I wouldn't exactly say that I hate it either. There's a lot of forms this new reboot could take. I mean, with there being a whole timeline split, it could really tackle anything. But if suspicions are right, then we won't be waiting all too long to see some actual footage of the film, as a trailer is said to be appearing soonish during autumn time, so give it a couple months and we may be golden. Some new expansions I'd actually like to see from this film to go further is maybe it could be interesting to see more modern filmmaking techniques across it all. There's a couple moments like a dolly zoom in hell that looks like it could be really accentuated to make the whole experience feel a lot more like an experience, and even more leading into the more theatrical physics of the game like we saw with Johnny again in the hell scene. That would just be crazy fun to see. I love when I see crazy moves that I can actually recognize from the games. Either way, this film is being produced by the likes of James Wan, known for his works on The Conjuring and Aquaman, whilst helmed as the director is Simon McCoy, who's not directed a feature film before, but has done some film quality ads for the likes of PlayStation, Nissan, Duracell and Star Wars, Call of Duty, Halo and Netflix, so we'll have to see how all that pans out. The only other detail left to mention is I found this one description for the reboot that I couldn't find from most other sources, but in it describes the synopsis as a failing boxer uncovers a family secret that leads to a mystical tournament called Mortal Kombat, which seems to suggest a whole new original character, or maybe suggest that this takes place later in the timeline if it's someone's descendant along the way. Who knows? And though this is probably media bait, there's also mention that McCoy is very passionate about building a universe of Mortal Kombat rather than a single fighting film. So whether this becomes a cinematic universe of gory proportions, we'll have to see how well it does at box office first. But that's about all I have to say about this surprise upcoming adaptation. I swear every time I try to find something old, I just see it's being rebooted. Ah well, I'm excited about the prospect of modern CG fatalities and x-rays alone. This just seems like a great popcorn film if you've got the stomach for it. For now, I'll be ending it off here. My name's been Daz, you didn't really care, and I'll see you in a bit. Mortal Kombat. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to watch it. I can watch gore in the games, but in the films, I'm going to puke.